Again, Dennis, thank you so much for joining me here at MythVision. I really appreciate your time. I have a question from a Patreon member, Whiskey. Thank you for being a patron of MythVision. If you are watching this, consider joining and helping us out. I know that you can gain a lot from joining us. Question. What is Dr. MacDonald's perspective on the prevalence and popularity of so-called Gnostic Christianity, seemingly from the jump? ? To me, it seems to suggest a heavy populist bent to the early Jesus movement, or at least a more accessible message, rather than solely under Second Temple influence, i.e., it was an in-house Jewish movement. Dr. MacDonald addresses many of those less attended to influences. Essentially, where is all this Gnosticism coming from, and why does it find itself repressed by the actors which set up the sect, which gets called Orthodox tradition? Also, if I may add a second, Derek, pick whichever you think is better. Question. Are the Synoptics and John a response to Marcion? Not that Mark material didn't exist prior, I think it did, but the collecting and publishing of the Gospels themselves being a reaction to Marcion's impact.
Those are two huge questions. And I'm going to start with the Marcion question first and then move to the Gnosticism question. And Derek, you can remind me to move to the Gnosticism question when it's appropriate. The problem with monitoring Marcionism is that we don't have a Marcion text itself. We have only apologists and heresiologists such as Tertullian and Epiphanius and others to go by. And there's lots of wonderful energy now about Marcion's gospel. Some would in fact say that Marcion's New Testament is the earliest collection of Christian literature, the first New Testament, and some have gone so far as to say Marcion's gospel should replace Q as the earliest gospel of all. I honestly think that's nonsense, and in my book, A Synopsis of Epic Tragedy in the Gospels, I have a lengthy discussion of Marcion's gospel. But that doesn't mean that a late New Testament writing, such as Luke Acts, is not engaging in with a Marcion form of Gnosticism. That is advocated by people, especially who think that the Acts of the Apostles, and including Luke, was issued in two stages. So the final stage can be late enough to engage early Marcion theories. I prefer not to take it that way, but I would prefer to say that some of the intellectual tradition that informs Marcionism comes from earlier forms of Gnosticism, some like early Valentinianism, perhaps. And Marcion just took that Gnosticism and recalibrated the New Testament in order to conform to this new ideology, because much of other forms of Christian Gnosticism simply gave different interpretations of the New Testament or created different documents. They didn't try to create a canon in order to replace the canon. So my answer to you, unfortunately, has to be complex. That is, the only book in the New Testament I think that we can make a claim is engaging Marcionism is Luke Acts. But I also think it's more likely that what we find engaged there to some extent, but not primarily, as the concern of the author, is a form of Gnosticism that's already moving in the direction of the Marcion tradition. Now, why does Gnosticism have legs in the modern world? And that is something of a mystery to me. I think part of the image is that there's a dissatisfaction with the organized church and organized religion, organized Christianity. And we have alternative voices from the early church that seem to resonate with certain readers. And this is a way of holding some kind of theology or faith or wisdom in the face of orthodoxy, so that you have your own competitive religious way of being in the world. But of course, I'm an atheist, and so any talk of the theology, even if it's a God who's beyond the gods of Gnosticism, is really not useful in my view as a way of understanding the world. I'm much more of a humanist and a pragmatist and a fan of science. And there are forms of Gnosticism that can valorize science, but there are others that do not, because they're world denying and arguing that the physical world is not the world of the soul, and the soul needs to be nurtured by the divine. And of course, there are lots of different forms of Gnosticism, so I don't want to put them all in the same basket. But I think the quest for meaning is universal. And Gnosticism offers a alternative revelation to the Christian message. It has some affinities sometimes with Buddhism. It certainly has roots in Platonism. And I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade. I think if Gnosticism is nurturing to you and it produces good, then cherish that vision. It's not my vision. And but I think it's an alternative way of being spiritual and nurturing the soul that isn't plagued by the kind of male supremacy and hierarchical organization that modern Christianity has become.
And just to be a little direct on this, is why do you think there was so negative a reaction to Gnosticism by those who we call heresiologists, the Orthodoxy?
Well, again, the arguments are going to be different depending on the kind of Gnosticism we're talking about. But let's take Marcionism, for example. Marcion considered the God of the Hebrew Bible to be the demiurge who created the physical world. And because spirituality and the life of the soul is a fidelity to the God of Jesus, who is not the demiurge, the church really felt threatened that its Jewish scriptures are no longer part of the divine revelation. And much of the arguments of early Christianity had to do with the status of those texts. And those texts then get cherished in communities, and then they get protected by those communities. So when you have a challenge to the literature, you have a challenge to the heart of the community. So I think that helps understand why you have this hostility.
Ladies and gentlemen, be sure to sign up for Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald's Greek Mimesis in the New Testament course, Reading the Gospels with One Eye on Greek Poetry. Dennis spends 18 lectures diving into several parallels, building up the methodology to show you his methods and how he sees that the New Testament authors cleverly rewrite and really make Jesus such a better figure than what we see in the older Greek myths and their poetry. You can sign up today, own it for life. There are several hours, well over 8 hours of content in this course with 18 lectures. Dennis gives you so much to read and look up and consider in investigating. Did the New Testament authors actually imitate the Greek epics to write their narratives about Jesus? There's several reading recommendations, additional resources under every single one of the lectures. You can download 1 through 18 on MP3 in case you want to just download it and have it in your whatever the device might be in order to work and listen at the same time. You don't have to just see it. But if you decide to watch the content, it is all in 4K, extremely high quality content, as you can see.
And you did it in from Greek, Latin.
The audio is nice and loud, takes you through his book. Dennis takes a deep dive. Be sure to sign up today. I hope you will. This helps Dennis MacDonald, and it helps educate the world on what's going on in scholarship.